Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be doing another book review. This time it's going to be on Insomnia by Stephen King. What a surprise. Anyways, at the time of filming this, I just finished this book yesterday. I actually read... So my edition is 650 pages, and I read about 254 pages all in one day. Yesterday I just read it all. And I really need to talk about this book because I've never had this much trouble digesting a book. I've never had this much trouble thinking about whether I liked it or not. So we're just gonna go and talk about it today, okay? So, alright, this is a heavy book. This is very, very heavy. So as I said, my edition of Insomnia is 650 pages. As you can see, it is massive. Other editions are like 800, 900 pages. I don't know why, but the print is like kind of small on my edition, but whatever. This book is about a 70-year-old man named Ralph Roberts who starts to suffer insomnia after his wife has just died. And as he loses sleep, he begins to see things in the world that are weird. They're not just sleep-deprived hallucinations, he realizes. He notices that these are things that no one else can see, and that they suggest a massive conflict of higher forces that have used Derry as their battleground. So it's quite interesting. He like, a lot of the stuff that he sees, like, you know, more towards the start of the book, he starts to see people's auras, is what they're called, which, what the fuck is that? I don't know, but like, he can like tell what mood people are in. He can tell, like, you know, if they're gonna die within the next few days or shit like that. And it's quite interesting. And especially as it progresses and the stakes become higher and grander and we realize that there is other worlds than these, and these forces fighting in other worlds than these are slipping through to our world, it becomes pretty damn dire pretty damn quickly. So if I haven't made myself clear, I'm extremely mixed upon this book. I don't know what to feel about it, or like how to feel. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off, I'm just going to talk about all the things that I liked and talk about all the things that I didn't like. So I think probably the biggest bonus of this book is being back in Derry. I love being in Derry. I'm not going to spoil too much about like what happens in Derry or, like, you know, the people in Derry, but it is just great. The plot is extremely creative. I've never seen a movie or read a book anything like this. I find it really quite interesting. And as I said, the way it like kind of escalates is really, really cool. And like, it just builds and builds and builds, and it has some really awesome connections with some of his other works too. At least for the first half of this book, it's a really cozy read. Admittedly, it is very, very, very slow. It moves at a snail's pace, but it's easy to read. There's no, like, you know, effort required for the first half. You just kind of got to just sit back and enjoy being back in Derry. I know I'm shaking this book around a lot, but it's really fucking heavy. Fucking just shit like that. There we go. It focused a lot on abortion too in this book, which sounds really weird. And when I first heard that, like, you know, yeah, it's a very political book and there's abortion involved, and I'm like, what the fuck? But I think it works its way into the story really nicely, and I think it's very, very impressive. And Lois Chase, one of the characters in here, is really cool. I love being around her. Really funny, really just... she's cool. This book has major tie-ins to the Dark Tower series. And like, just reading about some of this stuff, it is so informative on the Dark Tower series. And I'm just like, what the fuck? It's crazy, and it is just so fun. And the way it ties into the Dark Tower series, not only the Dark Tower series, but a bunch of other works too. I just found it so cool. But, and that's a big but, that is a massive, that's the biggest but you've ever heard. The tie-ins to the Dark Tower series are absolutely pointless and meaningless if you haven't read at least the first 4 books in the Dark Tower series. Like, this book just won't click Like, half of the shit that goes on in this book will make zero sense. Zero fucking sense. Everything that's happening, you're like, well, if you haven't read the series, I can just imagine, what the fuck? Why is this happening? Why is this so important? What is going on? Why are, like, all these random languages and words just coming out of characters' mouths without getting an explanation on what they mean? Why? This book just would make no sense. And I'm annoyed because I've only read the first 4 books in the Dark Tower series too. So I feel like I haven't gotten the full experience with this book because I haven't finished the series. And that's really sticking out at me like a sore thumb. There is so many things that are just left open for the rest of the series and how that'll work out and why the stuff in this book needed to happen and like how the stuff that happens in this book is so important to the Dark Tower series. Like, I'm just like, as I said, it is very interesting and cool, but I hate the way this book has prerequisites, like, just unknowingly. Like, if I hadn't been specifically told that I need to have read bits of the Dark Tower series, at least the first 4 books, to fully appreciate and understand this book, I would have hated it. And I wouldn't have known, because I don't think Stephen King said anything when he released it that's like, hey, well, actually, he released it after book 3, so technically you can read books 1, 2, and 3 and then go on to this one. But book 3 ends on like a cliffhanger, and you're not going to read any book aside from book 4 after reading book 3. You're going to go straight from book 3 to 4. But I'm getting off track. I'm just annoyed that it's like almost gatekeeping. Like, it's like, you know, if you have read the Dark Tower series and you haven't read this book, definitely read it. But if you haven't, don't read it. But it's, fuck. It pisses me off. There's a few other things that I'm not a fan of in this book. I'm not a fan of any of the other characters aside from Lois, really. Like, Ralph, like, he's fine, but I never felt, throughout this entire book, I never felt really attached to him. I never felt like, you know, I really cared for him. Admittedly, towards the end, like the back, like, you know, the last third of the book, I started to like him more, like, you know, because stuff started to happen and he had to, like, you know, make decisions, and I was like, okay, I like you for making that decision. But, like, because nothing happens in the first 2/3 of this book, really, well, not really much happens. You kind of just have to spend time with him, sitting around in the nursing home, like, looking at people, staring at, like, you know, their colours and their auras and all that weird stuff. It's just, I never had really that much of an emotional attachment to him. And then there's the other characters, like, you've got, you know, admittedly, this part, like, these characters don't get introduced until, like, halfway through the book, but it's literally mentioned on the cover. I won't say too much about them, but, you know, like, fucking, wee little Clotho, wee little Lachesis, and rogue, angry, crazy little Atropos! Fuck me. The little bald doctors, I imagine them to speak like that. I imagine them to be fucking, like, sitting on a chair, kicking their little legs, getting all panicky, talking about it. I didn't like them. I mean, they were fine, but, like, the only reason I, like, you know, gave a shit about them at all was because every single time they spoke, I thought they would speak like that. Oh my god, man. Oh, Jesus. Alright, let's move on. This book really didn't paint a clear image in my mind. Like, almost all Stephen King books, this is one of the only ones I can think of, paints such a clear image of what's happening, and I'm just like, I feel like I'm there. But with all the stuff, like the auras and the just fucking, like, I'm not going to go into it, but I'm just like, it didn't suck me in and paint such a clear image the way he normally does. One thing I love about Stephen King, and I notice I have to do with a lot of other books that I never have to do with King, is reread passages, because I'm like, wait, what was that? I didn't quite get that. It just, I forget that I'm reading, I forget that there is writing, and I feel like I'm watching a movie, or I'm just sucked in there. A lot of the times with other books, I'm just like, wait, I didn't quite catch that, but he just sucks me in so much. But I found a lot of times when reading this book, I had to go back and I'm like, wait, what the fuck? Like, there's a scene towards the end of the book in part 3 where you probably know what I'm talking about, but like one really, really weird thing happens, and I'm just like, huh? The plot of this book, while it is creative, it gets a little convoluted for my liking, especially in part 3. Like, a lot of big Stephen King books are split into 3 parts, and this one's no exception. So you got like, you got a prologue, part 1, part 2, part 3, and then an epilogue. So for this book, I thought the prologue and the epilogue were actually the best parts of this book. Like the epilogue, the last 20 pages were just so well written and just so good. But then there's part 1 was slow and just... I did enjoy reading part 1 because I was just happy to be back in Derry, but not really much happens, not really much develops. Part 2 I thought was outstanding. I really, really enjoyed part 2. And then part 3 is when kind of like all the things that have been building up just explode, and it feels a bit rushed. There's too much going on, and it just, again, it doesn't paint a clear image on my mind, and I found it just a little hard to read. Stephen King has actually said that this book was trying too hard, and it's a bit of a try-hard book, and I wholeheartedly agree. I have no problem with him going out there and trying to do wacky experimental stuff, which is what I love about King, but when he says trying too hard, I'm assuming he means it's trying too hard to be something completely different to anything ever put on paper before. And while the plot is unique, it might be a little too out there. Like, it's so weird and so strange that, again, it doesn't paint a clear image on my mind, and it almost felt like he wasn't able to... It just feels as though when you get to part 3 of this book, he wasn't able to sustain the whole... all the fantasy kind of shit and, like, keep it going. I felt like he... I don't know what this term is, grasped a bit beyond his reach or something like that with this book. I just don't think it's nearly one of his best. I think it's, I'm rambling a bit, but basically I agree. This book is trying too hard to be something different. It's overly long when it doesn't need to be. Like, it is much, much, much longer than it needs to be, which is funny because I actually just said that part 3 feels rushed. Had it been, like, sprinkled throughout the book and kept all the stuff going and had the book taken place over, like, part 3 takes place over about a day. Had the whole book been taken place over maybe about a week, rather than, like, months, or I think it even ends up being years, this whole thing takes over. Like, this whole book takes place over such a long amount of time, and then part 3 is just like, boom, in one thing, and it's just trying to cram it all in. Had it been spread out a bit throughout the book, I think it would have been much better. I am going to give Insomnia 3 stars. I think the reason I'm giving it 3 stars is because I'm just so mixed. I don't think this is a bad book. Had I given it 2.5 stars, that would mean I'm just like, it's not that good. But 3 stars, I enjoyed reading several chunks of this book. There are several parts of this book that are really good. There are a lot of things that work, but I'd say that in the grand scheme of things, at least right now, all those several good things never come together to make one great thing. And again, I'm going to reiterate, if you haven't read at least the first 4 books of the Dark Tower series, avoid Insomnia at all costs. So yeah, I don't think this is a bad book. I think it's experimental, which I'm down for Stephen King to keep doing, because sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. For example, Revival right there is one of my favorite Stephen King books. It's very experimental. It's like, you look at this thing, it's short, but like, it takes place over about 60 years. And that's just something, he's never really done anything like that before, and I find that it paid off really well. Whereas this book, I thought it was an experiment that he'd never really done, and he hasn't done since, and I don't think it pays off overly well. But It's a big but. It's another big but. There's been 2 big buts in this video. Once I finish the Dark Tower series, I feel as though I might have a newfound appreciation for this book. And I will reread it. Not anytime soon, but within the next couple of years, I would like to read this book a second time to make sure that, like, you know, not make sure, but see if my thoughts have changed, because I've heard a lot of people say that at first when they read this book, they're just a bit on the fence about it, but then after they finish the Dark Tower series and they go back and indulge back in this book, they say it really pays off. So I'm going to keep my hopes high. Again, I give this book 3 stars. I think it is a decent book, but at this point in time, I have very mixed feelings on it, and currently I'm reading Desperation, which is my 50th Stephen King book. Once I've finished that, I'm going to be ranking all of his books, ranking them from worst to best, all the ones that I've read, and don't be surprised if you see this like near the bottom of the list, because he just has so many good books, and this one is good, it's just doesn't quite hit the mark for me. Anyway, thanks for watching my review on Insomnia. I know I rambled quite a lot, but the reason I did is just because I have so much to say and I can't really... If I can't digest in my head how I feel about the book, of course it's going to be hard for me to put it into words, but I'm just glad to get my thoughts out there, just now, right now, just get them out. And yeah, that's all I have to say on Insomnia, but it's a very interesting book, and I'm more than happy to hear what you think of it in the comments if you want to tell me what you think of it. Anyway, I'll see you all later. Bye.